Hey, y'all. So this week, Stefan is out. So we're doing a little bit more of a nerd podcast. I've invited Steve Macenski here to chat with us about in-depth technical topics. If that sounds like your jam, listen on. If not, Stefan will be back next week and we will have more boring suit discussions. Talk with you next time. Hello and welcome to the Automated Podcast, coming to you semi-weekly-ish in the last little while. We've had a few busy weeks, so we're trying to get another one out here. And this week with me is Steve Macenski.
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about your background.
Okay. Well, up until for the last 4 or 5 years or so, I've been at Samsung Research leading the ROS2 navigation project, also known as Nav2. So it's been quite an exciting journey for the last 2 years. So starting off at a couple startup companies in the Silicon Valley area and building various navigation technologies for like indoor grocery store robots, which are around, people all the time and in very dynamic settings, which is very exciting. And then kind of transitioning into Samsung Research on a more research role to build out the general framework of navigation, rather than for one particular product, but for a larger classes of products and problems in the, both warehouse spaces as well as outdoors and in, the front of house and retail stores, and really just all over the place where you might want to put mobile robots.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we've been chatting a little bit because Polymath's mission to move to a more general navigation stack, general localization stack is kind of very much in line with that. And we depend pretty heavily on your work. So I very much appreciate you coming out and chatting with us this week.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's why I do all this stuff. I love seeing my work have impact all over the industry. So, I could work at one company and make an impact on one particular product, but, having an open source to be able to impact the entire industry is just such a pleasure. You don't get that opportunity very many times in life. So when you do, you gotta grab it by the horns and go with it.
Absolutely. And I think in robotics in particular, but software industry in general, there's been a move away from this kind of feeling of, open source, that means it's not serious. And it's been more towards, open source, that usually means there's a higher bar of quality and it's been reviewed independently. Do you feel you get that kind of pushback?
It really depends. Some projects, I think both have real valid concerns depending on what product you're talking about. Some of them, in the ROS ecosystem, I would agree are kind of a hobbyist grade, let's say, and that I wouldn't personally use in my systems. But then there's other things, like Foxglove Studio and Nav2, hopefully you think, and some other systems
Absolutely.
Which are way more production focused. Yeah, high test coverage, reliability used by real companies and real applications, really deployed at reasonable scales. But yeah, I think it depends on the community around it. The more communities that have things like open source foundations, so they have rules about contribution and quality standards and all these kinds of things, makes that technology more reliable to interact with. But someone's random open source project maybe a little less so. So it kind of depends on some context, and it takes a couple of years of working in the software industry to kind of see that subtle difference between those two kinds of projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get right back to that topic and gaps and contributions needed in the community. But to kick us off, as usual, let's start with our game that we play every week. So for those just tuning in, what we do is usually it's Stefan and I, but this week it'll be Steve and I kind of playing the role of two co-founders, trying to build a robotics company around some business idea that we have and some technology that Steve, playing the role of the CTO, really, really wants to use or really hates. That's an option too. You could say anti this. So we'll go for it. So I'm going to pick a random card here and we'll try to build a quick 10-minute business. So let's see, random new deck of cards this week. And let's see here. Farm. All right.
Okay, a farm.
Farm
right.
Setting.
That's a pretty open field, so to speak.
Usually my job.
Yeah.
All right. And if you want to pick a tech.
Okay. Farm teleoperation. Wow, this almost feels like something that Polymath might have in some demonstrations.
Yeah, so usually let's try to twist this out of its usual operation. So instead of building a reasonable robot that drives, why don't we completely replicate a human and have you teleoperating it to pick strawberries by hand entirely?
Oh, are we in like, if we're gonna do that, we have to be in like the Chernobyl exclusion zone or something.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's right. Very rich soil in Ukraine generally.
I don't know about the whole radioactive thing, but I know after the nuclear meltdowns in Japan, you can get like peaches from that region that are like $1,000 each or something. So,
well, of course.
Maybe the radioactivity makes things delicious. I don't know.
There was a whole field of radioactive science to force beneficial mutations on plants.
Oh, there you go. This is all intentional.
Right.
The Soviet Union really, they knew what they were doing.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So we're building radiation-resistant humanoid-ish farmers in Chernobyl.
Okay, all right.
What sensor set do we need?
I think a Geiger counter might be. I'm not exactly sure why we'll need that, but I'm sure that might be some interesting data, at least to collect no matter what. Maybe we can sell that back to the government or something. I don't know. There might be like a secondary revenue stream we can get from that.
I've always thought the clicking is not interesting enough. We got to pass it through some sort of AI filter to generate, a song it sings.
That's a good point. Maybe like have from like peaceful to like death metal.
Yeah,
on like Spotify.
There you go. There's your
yeah. Rather having like tourists have Geiger counters now, they're just like listening to the songs of the farmers in the wind.
Yeah, and then there's the one farmer playing death metal on fire, running towards you at full speed away from the hot zone.
Yeah. So I mean, that might be, if that's your first sign that you shouldn't be there, certainly it'll be your last.
Yeah. So Geiger counter. What else do we need to do farming in an exclusion zone?
Oh, I mean, sensor-wise, I mean the usual cameras, radar, yada yada. There's been a lot of IoT work happening in like soil moisture and humidity content, those kind of things. I actually did a hackathon at the Budweiser sponsored hackathon regarding that when I was in college. That was kind of interesting. But yeah, I don't know. What else do you think you would need?
That's awesome. Well, I think given the general geopolitical situation right now, probably some sort of camouflage would be a good idea. To speak a little bit towards the realistic, it's been interesting. We've talked to a number of groups doing farming robotics, and one of the really hard crops are fragile crops like strawberries, because they're really low to the ground, they're really squishy, and they grow in kind of all sorts of directions. And so crops for strawberries are trying to adjust how they plant strawberries on these kind of plastic sheets, so that it's really obvious to see where the berry is versus this plastic background.
Oh yeah, I think I've seen like videos like that. Yeah. They're kind of like not really in the ground; they're just kind of hanging out the side of a trough or something.
Exactly. And here the added benefit is you're plasticking the soil so that it doesn't blow away and spread radioactivity outside of
Yeah. I mean, we could just make this real easy, and just have like some blenders. We just pick up the entire plant, throw some arugula in there, and just like it's now just a smoothie product. There you go.
Yeah, gives you that healthy glow, that radium glow from our system. Why would it have to be humanoid if we're gonna go down this ridiculous path?
I mean, why? Why not? I mean, humans are humanoid. I mean, it's just like having a bunch of import labor that you have doing
ease of teleoperation.
Yeah. Oh yeah, ease of teleoperation certainly. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Nicole's making motion. You reach down and you pick up this virtual strawberries by hand, exactly, while you're playing death metal.
I mean, like, if we're gonna plant some crops there, I mean, like, what would we want? What would we want to harvest?
I mean, it's going to have to be something really valuable. That's
what I was thinking is that I saw like online they had like a Chernobyl vodka, where it's made of like the potatoes from the Chernobyl sites that were then like distilled, and as part of that process you remove the radioactivity, hopefully, I assume. And I mean, so we can make like we could make like really good scotch. That's what we could do, because I mean, Ukrainian soil is good for grain and that kind of stuff. So we can definitely start to make some like really high end. There's got to be a pun to be made there with radioactivity.
Yeah, we can't call it scotch though. It's going to have to be called whiskey or those derivatives. It's not in Scotland, but yeah, no, that's a great idea. Because you're going to need these centrifuges to spin out the radioactivity. You're going to get a visit from Uncle Sam of like, what are you using the centrifuges for? Vodka. Okay, that's the least worrisome thing we had in mind for this. That's awesome.
They're really sensitive. When they people are importing aluminum tubes, and somehow that's part of the centrifuge. So,
exactly. Yeah. Again, with that geopolitical situation right now, death metal playing humanoid robots in camouflage around Chernobyl might be a warning sign.
That's definitely why it can't be vodka. The Russians would just steal it all. So if you make it, some nice whiskey, I don't know.
It's camouflaged enough for it.
Yeah.
All right. So what are we going to call this horribly doomsday-looking machine roving the countryside?
That's a good question. It has a very vivid essence about it that I can't quite summarize. I feel like just a new word needs to be invented for it.
Ivan the not terrible, but embrightening.
Yeah.
No, Ivan the Radiant.
Oh, there we go. I like that. Yeah.
Ivan the Radiant, 3000, of course, in Stefan's honor. For that's always the product. Ivan the Radiant 3000, coming to you as soon as the war ends, maybe before, for the low price of, well, what's your military budget look like? All right. Transitioning over to our big discussion topic today. What are we chatting about?
Well, I don't know. What are we chatting about? Well, I assume we're going to be chatting a bit about ROS 2 and the nav2 project within that. So I think we talked a bit about areas where we need some contributions in the ROS world. And I think that's always the thing we harp on in open source: contributions, contributions, contributions. But I don't know if there's anything in particular you want to talk about those contributions.
Well, let's say I'm coming in and I'm a gifted amateur. Where would you want me to put my time? Where do you think is the biggest gaps that you see?
An area that's very broad and yet receives very little attention, and this is kind of the status quo utilities, I'd say, like things like PCL ROS and image pipeline and OpenCV ROS bridges and these kinds of tools, which people kind of take for granted, saying, oh yeah, it's here, but also doesn't receive a whole lot of attention for a number of reasons. But when I first started at Samsung Research, I took over the maintenance of these things because they were largely abandoned. So I helped lead the porting effort over to ROS 2, did a bit of myself, but largely actually worked on recruiting contributors to do the bulk of the work itself. These tools were made originally, I think, at Willow Garage and not really played a lot with since then. In both PCL, and now there's things like Open3D and OpenCV, and I assume there's other competitors in that area as well, really don't have any updates made to it. So none of the new algorithms have like the components made for it. And even some of the older algorithms probably aren't really API compatible or have like so many like if defs for like different versions that there are totally legacy from a decade ago. And I think there's a lot of attention here to make these like modular perception components that can be utilized by a larger set of robotic systems moving forward. I think it just needs like a fresh redesign from the ground up. And I think that's the kind of thing that a lot of novice users will be generally aware of PCL as a library and generally aware of OpenCV as a library. And bridging that to ROS 2, I think is a really great area of contribution to work with some senior architects to figure out solutions to start implementing those.
Absolutely. I mean, even us just recently, we've been trying to find a decent way to measure and subscribe to RTSP streams and figure out their latency and fuse them into image pipeline. And there's a few people who've kind of written GStream wrappers, but there's nothing been updated, and OpenCV isn't really built for that sort of thing. And like, there's a lot of gaps that slow down development more than it should.
Yeah.
And none of this stuff is proprietary, right? Like a GStreamer plugin shouldn't be proprietary.
I think it's actually a Samsung thing as well. That was donated to the Linux Foundation a bit ago, though.
Yeah.
No, it is a little baffling to me that more attention has been played to it. But at the same level, I understand, as a formerly a more corporate user of these perception technologies, very infrequently did I need something so building blocks friendly to modify. I kind of have a pipeline in mind that I was thinking about and having to deal with, like, is the zero copy really zero copy when you're dealing with these very large things coming at high frequencies? It's always a concern. So sometimes it's easier to say, hey, subscribe to sensor data, write everything in my own perception scripts, and then move forward from that point. But then that's the same problem of a lot of things that ROS helps deal with, is trying to remove we make these one-off scripts for everything. And so maybe from where things were in ROS 1, it's time to reevaluate that consideration for ROS 2, especially when we're adding products like behavior trees and navigation. So you have the ability to have much more modular little components doing but little things as part of your larger system. And then you have more commercial products like Move It Studio, which have nice little sequential blocks you can program for industrial automation types of tasks that really lend themselves well to these kind of technologies. I think they just need to be rethought for the 21st century, so to speak. But although I think, it's all 21st century technology.
Yeah, exactly. It's I do feel including OpenCV and things kind of got stuck in like the late 2000s, early 2010s ish.
Yeah.
And ML kind of leapfrogged it. And you see a lot of the ML libraries used outside of robotics are kind of a little bit more modern, a little bit more architected differently and more multi-architecture, whereas a lot of the older robotic stuff hasn't quite bridged that gap yet.
Yeah, open ROS integrations with like TensorFlow and PyTorch and all those kinds of things. It's always an interesting topic, because it feels like it's an obvious kind of low-hanging fruit to have done. But then when you actually look at like what do you need to do, it's like there's when you're actually doing the inferencing, it's like 20 lines that are not like totally specific, but a lot of it is relatively specific to the model that you're creating. And so that's all application specific anyway. And the ROS stuff wrapping around that is another 20 lines of code. So it's kind of, it's almost trivial to make that, whenever somebody says, oh, look, I made a PyTorch wrapper for ROS, it's like a 40-line script. I just, I roll, whatever, moving on kind of thing. But yeah, there really should be some better integrations there, but I'm not really sure what that looks like.
That's fair. Maybe the meta point here should be, we need a way to share those small pieces and examples in a way, because myself, if I can't find something directly, I'll go to ROS Discourse or whatever, right? And I think that's great, but I don't know if that's the right path forward to kind of depend on a fully distributed community kind of forum as a knowledge base. I don't know if anybody's kind of made a push towards being a 0 to 100 tutorial for all these components for ROS. Have you thought of it?
Yeah, I mean, with infinite time and infinite resources, sure, but also like that you're starting to branch what would be a commercial product at that point to that level of documentation. I'm not sure that like because the minute you say like poof, that all my documentation exists for everything that currently exists under the sun, 3 years later, I've added 8 more algorithms to NAV2. ROS 2 is based on now, and it's just like the world's flipped upside down by that point. So it's a never ending battle, but I think that's why it's a good incremental battle to start documenting the things that are consistent and that never change. And the new bleeding edge stuff, I think, is always going to be to a degree in every open source community not as well documented, but it's also those are the technologies being used by the true industry experts and not being used by the novice hobbyists or whatever.
Folks.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to take them a long time before they ever hit those points and to begin with.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when you're thinking of contributions from the community, do you feel that this falls more towards, and going forward, do you feel it falls more towards individual contributors or companies or mix? Like, do you see where that balance may lie?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a mix. So as part of NAV2, I've worked with college students, interns doing projects at larger companies, startups, large companies themselves, individuals who are just doing it on their nights and weekends, pretty much everything in between. And each of them have a part of the puzzle that they can help fit into. So, for the companies, this is where I want to see larger contributions, like new algorithms, new systems, major architecture efforts that are, obviously in line with their companies. I'm not just saying like, hey, let's go dump $1 million in infrastructure for things that aren't even related to our products, right? It should be in the direction where you're going, but, understanding that core robotics technology is not itself, generally speaking, competitive advantage. Sometimes it can be, but largely speaking, I don't think it usually is. And, seeing more of that happening. And I think that's not happening a whole lot right now. And this is where you see most of the new technologies happening, and MoveIt are motivated by Picnic, who's not stealing money, but taking money from companies to do various things to open source it. And then NAV2, it's largely just been my personal R&D efforts on the side whenever I'm not responding to the people's tickets and stuff to get real systems done. But I really look forward to a future, and this is kind of the future I've been encouraging and has started to gain more momentum in the recent months, to having companies with interesting piece of technology stand up and say, yeah, we will open source this, because we recognize that making a 10% better perception algorithm isn't something that's going to stop our competitors from taking over us, right? But yeah, then you have the individual contributors, where I don't expect somebody nights and weekends to go through and do like 1,000 engineering hours project, themselves. There are some people like that, and I've worked with them, and they're 10x fantastic kind of people, but that's, you can't expect everyone you interact with in the world to be like that. So yeah, for them, there's, smaller kind of projects, bug fixes, documentation updates, especially if they're using a lot of the tutorials, they're the greatest people to tell me where things aren't clear, because, I've been doing navigation stuff for a decade now, and it's not always obvious to me what's not obvious to them. I'll say I try to write things to be extremely approachable, and I make a point not to use a lot of industry jargon when I don't have to. But with that said, I'm only human, and there hits a point where, you assume everyone that you interact with knows what you know, but, in fact, that can't possibly be true. I think that's trying to figure out where that line is not always good for everybody. I think I'm better than average at it, but I don't know, maybe I'm not. Other people would have to be the judge of that.
No, I mean, our engineering team's been very happy working with your stuff. No question.
Okay, awesome. Well, it makes me feel good. Yeah.
Yeah.
The benefits of working at a research organization where I'm not under massive time pressure to deliver in a particular timeline beyond my own timeline that I want to deliver in. So I've got my own internal pressures, but that's not the same thing as like,
ship it.
Yeah, ship it now. Yeah. So I can spend time on unit test coverage. I can spend time on proper architecture and documentation, things that, I expect at like a principal or staff level that most of those kind of people would push back to do similar things, but maybe not to the extensive degree that I've been able to.
You gotcha. With the kind of the changes that we discussed a few episodes ago in OSRF and OSRC, is there now space in the ROS community for kind of a Red Hat equivalent in ROS, or maybe Ubuntu equivalent in ROS? Or do you think we don't need that sort of thing?
I'm going to try to understand the parallel you're trying to draw.
So I would say there's Linux as an OS is kind of a big amorphous thing that you could go in 50 million different directions. But generally speaking, if you're a beginner, you can just download Ubuntu and go for it. And if you're doing something corporate and serious and you need serious support, you go to Red Hat and get a Red Hat distro, which is supported and has specific service agreements and those sort of things.
Yeah.
Does ROS need a sort of same thing, or are we okay without it?
So it's not you describe it that way, but I think we already have that, right? People like Apex OS or whatever, but these things aren't open source. So I don't think that moving forward there's going to be like a ROS dash hardened or whatever, or ROS dash real time that is also going to be equivalently open source. I think that if we had something like that, then everyone would just be using it. It would just be ROS. But yeah, I think there will be products that are made to harden it. Apex definitely exists for that. Who knows what Intrinsic's doing, behind the magic curtains. But I suspect that there's something like that might come out of it at some point, if not immediately, at some point in the future. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is to design to actual needs. Especially the canonical folks typically have problems where there's not really a lot of business. They have a lot of desire to make money, and they take a lot of money to do that, but they haven't been successful in converting that into actual money. So I don't necessarily think that the Linux model is something to be replicated necessarily.
Gotcha. All right. Well, coming back to it then, what is another kind of gap you see in the community aside from maybe the direct contribution side of things?
Yeah, I mean, the less sexy stuff, but infrastructure. This goes anywhere from like the ROS build farm kind of stuff, that's awfully complicated. And I'll have to say, even I have not a sufficient understanding of it, talking in great detail. You'd have to talk to Stephen Ragnarok for that. Yeah. But, even in the individual projects like, Nav2, we have our own CI system. We have our own build farm equivalency. We have our own, binaries. We distribute and release and processes attached to that. And a lot of that's the really thankless work that's very difficult to get funded and to deal with. And I'm sure Picnic Robotics has a similar kind of struggle where,
as do we.
Yeah. So it's quite difficult, especially for the scale of the project that Nav2 represents. So yeah, more contributions to help make these systems better. I mean, a lot of them are just kind of things that we did because this was the most obvious thing to us at the time that might not be representative of the current state of the art of systems. That said, huge shout out to Rough and White. He is the CI czar as far as I'm concerned now too. I mean, whatever he wants to do goes, because he does a lot of really great work with optimizing our build times. He made caching plugins for Colcon and a bunch of this magic stuff to make the Nav2 repository actually be able to build on the free tier of Circle CI, which is quite amazing, especially as the more and more I add, it's like we always run into more and more problems. Like it's like, oh hey, I added this like templated plugin. It's like, oh, like now our builds take over an hour, and so he invented this new Colcon caching thing to make that work. And then I threw in the MPPI controller, which also is templated. It's a ton of these plugins. It's like, oh, now we're over 2 hours, and he figures out the magic to make everything compile and turn over. And we've actually had to reach out to Circle CI a few times saying, hey, like, can you give us like a higher tier and just like, on the free? And they're just like, well, actually, we looked at it and actually you're already using like the highest of the high that we give anybody on, that's not paying us, bunches and bunches of money. So it's like, oh, okay. So, thank you, Circle CI. But yeah, there's definitely some problems there. Yeah, man. I mean, infrastructure is a big area of using help. I mean, I don't think anybody, even at OSRF, is super happy with the build farm situation that is there today, but millions of dollars.
Everybody loves Jenkins.
Yeah.
Favorite thing.
Yes. But they invested millions and literally millions of dollars in it, and I don't know how much it costs to run it on an annual basis. But I've heard numbers in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that it takes to run all that stuff every year. And yeah, moving over to GitHub Actions for things might be great, or moving into other infrastructure. But again, it requires millions of dollars of assets to do that. So having more community assistance, either financially directly, which OSRF now has a donation box, which you definitely go donate money to, and it's tax deductible for all the companies. But other than that, spending some time and helping quash issues or improving things, or start at least looking at what a roadmap could be to move into another direction, so that once there is interest, that we know what we're going to do. Because right now it's kind of one of these resigned that the state is the state because it is the state.
Yeah, no, and we shouldn't do that. That's how big open source projects die, is by not pushing them forward and not improving the state. So you heard it here first, folks. Send donations to Ross and
OSRF,
Machine Time.
OSRF's website now has that box set up now that after that acquisition, so that definitely donate money. If I was a company, I'd be donating money to them
for sure.
I think you can donate $50 a month.
Absolutely. That's awesome. What's a gap that we've seen? Polymath, we have a very specific and narrow focus. I'd say sort of a gap we've seen is that there's still a lot of inertia in ROS 1, that not everything has moved over to ROS 2. is particularly like weird esoteric drivers or devices or
Yeah, a few examples. I actually keep a list of those kind of complaints just so that there is a central. What are you talking about?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
I'll pull it up. I'll
No
send it
worries.
to you for sure. But even stuff like we're talking to, forget, Advanced Micro, something that does a radar device.
Okay.
And we're like, where's your driver? Like, here's a ROS driver. Okay, well, ROS 1. Okay, well, we'll have to port it over and do that sort of stuff. So I think that's been good. ROS 1 is basically sunsetting in 25?
25. Yeah.
So better get moving on all this.
Yeah. And so what's interesting, I forgot who I was talking to last week before, something like that, where they were basically saying, oh yeah, there's not enough momentum over to ROS 2, yada, yada, yada. And I'm just like, I don't think that's true. And so what's really nice is that there's the metrics.ros.org, which is something I don't often reference, but every now and then I do. And looking at it, I mean, the last metrics we saw was that 70%, or I think it was 72 or whatever percent of people were using some ROS 2 distribution. So it's already more than half.
Nice.
Far more than half, actually. And then, 20 whatever percent left over running some version of ROS 1. And that's measured by like binary installs and that kind of thing. So, I think we already have largely moved in that direction. But I mean, it's always been a struggle. I mean, even before ROS 2 came out, of getting manufacturers to support their own drivers. Kat Scott over at Intrinsic has been harping on these companies to support their own drivers, not just have community people doing it for free or whatever for a long time now, with varying degrees of success. Yeah, it's been an ongoing struggle regardless of the ROS 2 transition. So I think what we're seeing is really just a manifestation of that same impact more than it's a qualifier on like the quality of ROS 2 or companies using ROS 2.
Oh, absolutely.
Drivers in particular have always been kind of shit.
Always a very difficult thing. Yeah, absolutely. It's always very heartening when we go to talk to a new sensor manufacturer. Yeah, great. Yeah, let's try it out. Here's a Windows binary. Okay.
Oh God. Yeah.
Thanks.
I have some stories. I think I'm still under NDA from previous companies for, though. Unfortunately, ask me another 3 years.
Yeah, no, there was plenty of those. Here, run this little tiny virtual machine just to run your stupid driver because you can't be bothered. Yeah. No, that's awesome. So, if people want to learn more about contributing or working with you or working along goals that you suspect, what should they do? Show up at your house maybe at 3 a.m, or throw rocks at the window?
It's 3 a.m. I'm working pretty hard to get my sleep schedule in place. So at least wait until like 7:30. Yeah, okay. It's all at 7:30 in the morning. But yeah, I'll give you my address within the show notes.
Awesome.
But more seriously, so ROS Answers, I'm active on that. If you tag things that are relevant to me, I will typically respond, assuming it's not something that's like, okay, this has been answered so many times the world over. It's like it's not worth my time to answer. But
how do I install ROS No Edit?
Yeah, it's like, oh, why do I have this TF? Why do I have this TF error? It's like, okay, I'm not responding to that. But most things I will. So for answers, how to get started, great location for that. For like more proactive things, so there's a ROS Slack, which you can find the README file of the NAV2 project. That's a great place to talk to me. I'm always on that. So I have plenty of conversations through that medium. If you're interested in like actively contributing, it's a great place to reach out to me. If you have bugs or feature requests or all that kind of stuff, the issue tracker within NAV2 itself is a great location. I'll say, unless you feel like you're in a particularly special situation, like you're Dieter Fox or whatever, do not email me. It will automatically be deleted. I have too many people asking for help via email, and I cannot handle that. So unless there's a particular thing that you think needs to be sidebarred with me privately, do not email me, please.
Sounds like a plan. Well, thanks so much, Steve. I really appreciate you coming in and visiting.
Yeah, this is fun.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. And we'll see you next time.